There's snakes in the garden. Blood on the vines. I can't wait anymore.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Lori and Marcia. I am so sorry I'm so late. First of all, I shouldn't. I didn't realize I had. Well, number one, I realized because I'm doing this in Zoom that I have to have two computers in order to make everything work that I have to do when I go through Zoom. It's a little bit more complex. Um, you can do more. I can show you PowerPoints and things like this, but I have to have a second computer, which meant I had to go to my family last minute because I realized that get the computer up and running. So first I went to my son and his thing was not booting and not working. And I kept going through that for about a half hour. Then I said, screw it. Let me go to my husband, got to my husband's computer, got his here situated, finally got that up and going. And then when I went to go on live, it said I don't have permission. I'm like, what do you mean I don't have permission? It's my own group. So then I had to go through YouTube, find out why it's giving me this error. And here, because it's a new group I created, I had to adjust the settings to allow myself to go live through Zoom. So it's just been a headache, and I'm really, really sorry because I hate to start a new study out like that. So if you're new here and you've never seen me before, I'm not usually this disorganized. Sometimes I'm disorganized, but not this bad. Let's get this show on the road now that I'm finally here. Is everyone here? I'm trying to stall a little bit, but I have to do my little intro stuff. So hopefully some people come on. You guys here? Okay. So welcome to the Turn SpyCast at Queen Bee's Outlandish Hive. It's our first live here on this page. My name's Angela, and I am also called Queen Bee here. I started this page to kind of work in conjunction with my Patreon account, Queen Bee's Hive, which is www.patreon.com/Queen Bee's Hive. That's my Patreon account. I created this page to work in conjunction with the programs that I do through that page. So I also teach studies on Outlander Cast Clan Book Club, but that's solely book studies and nothing else. So all of the extra stuff that I do through Queen Bee's Hive, if I need to have a Facebook platform to operate on, I needed to create this page for those things. So that's why we're here doing this. So I teach, I do a lot of different things. Most of you know who I am. I'm not going to repeat it all, but I hope you guys will start talking because I want to make sure my comments are working. So you might be asking yourself, we're here to start this look at the show Turn on AMC Plus now, about the Culper Spy Ring, which really proved its worth during the Revolution, was one of the war's best kept secrets, and really ended up being, now you're going to see my eyes looking around because I have three different things hooked up here on my phone to watch the chat. Hey, Angie, I have the phone to watch the chat. I have my document with my notes to the right, and I have the camera with the zoom and everything to the left. So if you see me looking around, that's why. So I'm going to try to position myself so I can see everything a little better. Anyway, so this is a look at the show Turn, and you might be asking yourself, why are you doing this? I thought this group was about the Outlander books and show. Well, yes and no. This group, for you that don't know, was started, like I said, to coordinate with things I'm doing on my Patreon site, which is www.patreon.com/QueenBeesHive. And of course, you can be a member of this page without being a Queen Bee's Hive patron, but you will enjoy the whole experience of everything we do if you are on both platforms. Because I cannot offer, when I have these two platforms, I can give more comprehensive content. because they're like two different ways I can do things. And in each platform has benefits for different things. So with having the two, I can kind of do a whole cornucopia of stuff. So to get the whole feeling of getting all of the content, you would need to be on both. But you can be just this platform as well. You can be a patron as little as $5 a month. Most of you that are here right now know this, but some might have stumbled in fresh here that are interested in the turn study and don't know all my deets. So that's why I'm giving it to you. Or maybe listening once I get the podcast up and running, which I hope to do soon. So just to explain why I'm doing this. I see you, Scott. Okay, so I think my chat's rolling now. So I am a very immersive person, as most of you know, with things that I love. And my love of Diana's work has really fueled a love for all of the history and the culture that her work touches, which is a lot of different things. Her work touches a lot of different cultural things, events, characters, countries, a lot of lesser known important nuggets as well. And I'd like to dive deep into these things and explore the things that it touches. So if you're new to my studies or teaching, you'll trust me, you will discover I dive deep. And I always love to learn about the worlds and beliefs and culture and so forth, the people, places, history that are touched in Diana's world. And I've learned personally so much from her books because she intentionally tries to educate her readers through worlds and getting people to understand things. She's a teacher at heart and likes to challenge her readers to expand themselves. And I accept. I've learned a lot over the last decade or so, really immersing in this book. And she tends to like tease with little brushes of things that make you want to go running down a rabbit hole to learn more about it. And that's pretty much the heart of what I do at Queen Bee's Hive. And even in the book studies I do at Outlander Cast Clan Book Club is to go the next level, you know? And so just this past week in our drum study, there was a mention in the chapter about Claire's dress being made with silk from a Mrs. Pinckney in South Carolina, who experimenting with cultivating silkworms. It's just like this little throw-in mention, which I could tell this was like one of those little nuggets that Diana sprinkles in. So I went to like check it out and to see who this was. I posted an extra about it. An extra when I post is something that enlightens more, some element of the chapter or whatever. And so here she was this amazing woman who had this serious like trailblazing and revolutionary things. She was a key help in the revolution as well. Her two sons were involved, and then actually started leading the country after. She was like this major person, but she just kind of dribbles this little thing. And if you're curious enough to follow through, you can like learn about this whole great person that it's just like a minor mention in the book. And it's something that most readers, when they read, would just kind of fly by it, and not really look at it. But I mean, you think, like, who cares about this lady cultivating silkworms? You know what I mean? Why would you bother looking at this? But for me, Diana does so much research to infuse the stories. And I know this sounds weird, but I almost feel like I owe it to her to care why she included something and to follow up to learn more about it. And I feel like, I usually get a feel when she's dropping one of these little nuggets or a little breadcrumb to follow. And I've done this for a while, and it's led to me ending up teaching seminars and courses on Celtic lore and Scottish history and colonial immigration, writing craft and history. I mean, she really touches a lot of areas, which is why these books captivate us so much. They stimulate our mind and increase understanding of a lot of different areas. So this is what Queen Bee's Hive is all about: immersing in the world, understanding it on a deeper level, being entertained in the process as much as I get entertained, but also expanding our own knowledge so that we can appreciate Diana's world yet again in an even more significant way with our Beehive community. And then we can make these discoveries together, and we do that through a number of fun and engaging ways. We recently did a swarm trip for patrons to Monmouth Battlefield reenactment and historic Philadelphia. And that was definitely an immersive trip. A few of you are here that were there. including one of our manlanders, Scott, that came with his wonderful wife, Janine, who I dearly love. So, but that was like the idea behind it, to immerse and walk the footsteps of the books. And one of the other ways that we do that at Queen Bee's Hive is called Pollinating, which explores a show, a book, movie, mini series, documentary, whatever, that isn't Outlander itself, but connects, intersects, enlightens Diana's world in some way. And then when we go back for a reread, like after we do this study, after we look at Turn and we kind of learn a lot about this, that'll be like another layer when we go to back to reread Echo and Moby. We'll have the simultaneous things that we learned that were happening here to kind of layer into our read. So this is what we do with this. That's the idea. So, and revolutionary history in general is of a special interest to me because I live right here in southern New Jersey, a crossroads of the Revolution, we are called, because we're right between Philadelphia and New York. I'm 30 minutes from Philadelphia. So making our first pollinating project, Turn, makes perfect sense to me. So Turn finished its run in the early years of Outlander. And I did watch the first run of the show while it was on, and only once though, like the episodes ran, I watched once and that was it. And I haven't rewatched since. But since then, I feel like through all of the stuff I've done for Outlander, I've almost acquired the equivalent of an associate's degree in revolutionary history. So I feel like now when I rewatch this show, since I have only watched it once and it was quite some time ago and I've done a lot since then, I have a feeling a lot of these little things that maybe went right past me the first time when I watched Turn will now start popping, because, I kind of have such an immersion into revolutionary history. As we go, we'll be reflecting on when there's a little tie there to the Gabaldon verse, using what we know from each story to enlighten the other story. So we'll be talking about these little ties a little bit as we go. Maybe what a certain episode or a character reminds us of, or maybe gives us a new light or understanding to a character in the books, and how the timelines sync up, what's happening in our world while this is happening, things like that. We'll kind of keep connecting it back. This particular story is centered more in New York rather than mainly Philadelphia and the southern areas of the war, like we're used to on the Outlander verse. It does have some Jersey and Valley Forge is included a little bit in this show, but it's mainly Long Island, New York, and getting stuff behind the lines, which was behind the British lines in New York. But in our books, because our people weren't there, we weren't there so much. So we didn't see a lot of that, but it was there. The one thing we do see when Echo opens, this story takes place right after the Battle of Long Island, which happens in early Echo. And that's the first time the first thing that happens to William is get lost in the fog, that whole thing when Washington was retreating. So that's where we're picking up with that having just happened in the story. Okay, so we kind of do have a sync with it a little bit. There are many crossovers of characters and events over the course of Turn. There's Monmouth, Battle of Monmouth is in Turn. Winter at Valley Forge is in Turn. Benedict Arnold, Tarleton, Washington, General Lee, John Andre, Nathan Hale, Robert Rogers, Henry Clinton, Marquis de Lafayette. So there's a lot of people that pop up in our books and also pop up in the show. Like I said, we actually open on the wake of the Battle of Long Island and so forth. So let me give you a little bit of details. So before we talk about the show details, this is Turn Washington Spies. It's a period fictionalized drama series based on Alexander Rose's book, Washington Spies, the story of America's first spy ring. And that book came out in 2007. The series originally aired on AMC Network for 4 seasons, April 6, 2014 to August 12, 2017. The showrunner and executive producer is Craig Silverstein, and the show was filmed in Virginia, sometimes around Richmond, sometimes around Colonial Williamsburg. So they really have a lot of like authentic look to it. So I'm going to play a couple of videos as we go through here. Let me just check the board real quick before I play the video. I learned more than I ever remembered about the Revolutionary War. I learned in school. Learning about the Culper Ring will fill in a lot of holes. Has anyone read the book? I am reading the book. I have about 2 hours worth of Audible time left on it. Now, remember, there is a lot of different theories and different thoughts about the Culper Spy Ring, and depending on the book you read, it'll say different things. So know that there's some things that maybe he proposes that may be a little off. Don't take it like gospel, because then there's another book that'll say, for instance, there's an Agent 355, which has a lot of debate. And I'll talk about that when we get closer to, a little further along. But there's about 4 or 5 different things people believe that could be. Some people think it was Anna Strong, because it's all that's in the code book for that is a lady. Okay. It could just be, you put that down when you're referring to a lady, generic, but then he uses that word and it attaches it to somebody that's going to help him. That's part of the ring. And he just uses 355 in one of the letters. And so some people think it's Anna Strong. Some people think it was a maid or a servant in the house of John Andre. Some people believe it was Robert Townsend's sister, Sally. And some people think it was a slave servant person, or some people think it was a person that was having an affair with John Andre. So it's kind of, everybody kind of has their theory about Agent 355. In the show, they make it a freed slave that ends up going to work for John Andre. That's who they make the Agent 355 in the show. But it's debated. So like I said, there's some things, because this is a very recently learned about ring, some things are still in debate. So as I said, the showrunner and executive producer is Craig Silverstein. The show is filmed in Virginia. So I'm going to play this first little video, which features Seth Numrich, Heather Lind, and Craig Silverstein in a little interview when the show was going to premiere, kind of talking about their roles. Seth plays Benjamin Talmadge, and Heather plays Anna Strong, and the other gentleman is the showrunner. Okay, so I'll play this for you real quick.
Just purely learning a lot just from reading the pilot, and then understanding that these were real people and real events, and wondering why I had never heard the names of some of these people and the things that they accomplished. And the more I looked into it, the more I was excited about that opportunity to sort of recontextualize what I knew about history and about this particular conflict. So that was really exciting. And then beyond that, just the writing is it's so good. It's sort of undeniable. And you read something like that as an actor, and not only is it an opportunity to tell a great story, but they're beautifully realized human beings and people that you can get inside their head and are complicated and messy and interesting. And it just felt very real and accessible to me. And, just reading the pilot, I wanted more. I wanted to know more about them and get more involved in that. It just was very exciting.
Yeah, it's just such a complex period in our history, and I think in the world's history, and not having an understanding of what real people were going through, and what it was like to be on the home front of a war, and just have New York City occupied by the British sort of baffles my mind, and was burned to the ground. And it's just I think those truths about it really appealed to me. And for me personally, just to try to get to play a woman who really existed in that period when we know relatively so little about what women's lives were like, that was really appealing to me.
I think it was a world that I only thought I knew. and it was a much more exotic world than I expected when I read Alexander Rose's book. And that was exciting to me, to go to this time that's so incredibly important.
I play Anna Strong, and she was a woman who lived in Long Island. She was a childhood friend of the 4 members of the Culper Ring, and she contributed to the war, to the spy effort, by hanging different colored petticoats on her laundry line, which overlooked the Long Island Sound, and that way she could communicate when somebody was ready with a message, or communicate to the courier in the bay about what needed to happen. And incredibly risky. A woman was never expected to be involved in politics, so she was, I think it gave her an advantage. Nobody suspected her, but she was risking her life and quartering English soldiers at the same time, so there was a lot at stake for her.
I play a character named Benjamin Talmadge, who grew up in Setauket, Long Island, with Anna Strong, Abraham Woodhull, Jamie Bell, who's our lead on our show, who plays that character, and Caleb Brewster, played by Daniel Henshaw. And so the 4 of them grew up together and were childhood friends and had similar political leanings and were sort of pro to the patriotic cause. And Ben Talmadge, my character, was the only one of the 4 who, Anna wouldn't have had this option, but to go and fight for the cause, and he joined up right away. Eventually, Caleb Brewster became a soldier as well, but Ben was incredibly passionate and driven about his sentiments and feeling like it should be an independent country. And he began fighting and led a Continental Dragoon squadron, so he was on horseback. And eventually he collaborated with George Washington to establish a network of spies behind enemy territory. And he reached out to his childhood friends who were still there in Long Island and had access to the British in a very real and intimate way. And so that was how everything got started, and then it sort of grew and grew from there.
One of the things that surprised me was how intimately George Washington dealt with these normal people on the ground. This farmer had the letters back and forth, and how much he leaned on and depended on them. I sort of viewed him as like way, way high up on a pedestal. And when we did research on him, found out that was an image he himself strove to create because he knew he needed to, but the real man was different. It also was interesting to me to learn that the sides weren't so clear cut, and that there were a lot of people, makes sense now that I hear it, that there were a lot of people who were very ambivalent about it, who thought that the war would be over in a few months, and wanted just to stay out of it. And that's a character and a personality that I never put in that time before. And when I saw that person in our main hero, was Abraham Woodhull, I saw that there was a place for me back then, where I could imagine myself wanting to stay out of things and eventually being pushed to action.
For such a long time, the English just assumed they were going to win. I mean, they didn't think that Americans had the military power or the ingenuity to win or to fight for what they wanted. And actually, I think the British presence in America, it started to work against itself. It started to be evidence of our oppression, or Americans' oppression. And so, the fact that the soldier was in your house eating your food actually turned people patriot, because they thought, hang on, this is my country now, and I want to be able to govern it. Yeah,
but the Culper Ring was responsible for some huge accomplishments. Probably the most famous being they were involved in the uncovering of the Benedict Arnold plot, which in theory, had that not come to light and had that gone according to their plan, it's very likely that the course of the war would have gone in a different direction. So that, among other things, they heavily contributed to the Continental cause and arguably changed the course of history.
Okay, so as they were saying, I wanted to kind of let you hear from the principals. The story covers events. The show covers events from 1776 to 1781, and features a farmer from Setauket and his childhood friends, and they form this unlikely group of spies called the Culper Ring, just ordinary folk, which eventually helps turn the tide during the American Revolutionary War. And The series on the show begins 1776, October 1776, right after the British recaptured Long Island and the port of New York for the crown and leave General George Washington's army in dire straits. And the first episode opens with the lines with like a text on the screen: Autumn 1776, insurgents have declared war against the crown. Following a successful naval landing, His Majesty's army has forced Washington rebels into the wilderness. New York City serves as the military base of operations for the British. The loyalists of nearby Long Island keep vigilant watch out for sympathizers and spies. And then season 1 ends August 22nd, 1777, the Battle of Setauket. So this is our first season that we're going to look at. It covers a little less than a year, about 10 months. So our next video that I want to show you, and I might pause as I look at it real quick, is from Brad Meltzer, and he kind of did like this little documentary on the Culper Spy Ring, and I'm going to show you a couple little bits of it that I edited out. So this is our first one, and he talks about how the modern CIA developed from this ring and from methods used in this ring. So I'm going to play that one for you next.
You have to remember, nobody back then truly knew who was loyal to the crown and who was loyal to George Washington. New York City, like today, was filled with people who were playing all the angles. So knowing who to trust was paramount.
So one of the things I wanted to bring to your attention, that was something that Heather said, and I can't even remember now what I wanted to say. My brain just kind of went, it'll come back to me. Go over, so you can kind of see there how the CIA actually has, and that was at the CIA headquarters, that particular bit of film, and they have it a little bit dedicated to the Culper Spy Ring and how its origins and a lot of the techniques that they use for the first time started there. And you know, these people really didn't know what they were doing. And I know what it just popped back to me. One of the things that Heather said in her interview, the first interview that we did, oh, your guys are going to love my clips. I did a lot of work to prepare for this today because this is like our first big intro and like kind of get our wheels cracking here, tell you how it's all going to lay out. So I did a lot. That's why I was like swamped. I was telling Salima, I said, I really should try to test this and make sure I don't have any screw ups when I do it, which of course I did. And I said, you know, she says, oh, I'm really looking forward to it. I said, yeah, I went overboard as usual. And she started laughing. She goes, but we love when you go overboard. Anyway, so one of the things that she said was how a lot of people were ambivalent at first. And remember, one of the things with the intolerable acts that happened was that the people were able to just take over your house, take over your crap, you know, and board their soldiers there. And, you know, just basically like your house wasn't your own. And we see in the beginning episodes of Turn, you'll see how they basically took over this town. These people necessarily weren't, they were really ambivalent. Like she said, they really like just wanted to survive it. You know, this thing can't last, you know, let's just try to get through it without like anything bad happening to us and that type of thing. But then these people just started housing their stuff, you know, they came in, they took over their church, turned it into a stable and a headquarters, you know, turned their tombstones into things to block ammunition, you know, went and took over people's houses and forced them to board them and all that. And so that got old really quick, and it started getting people feeling like their rights were really trampled. And you kind of see that in the beginning, how they kind of are taking over this town of Setauket, and it's like causing all this stress for everybody there, you know. So a little on the history. So October 1778 is when, and we're going to go over this in a little bit, what's different and some things that they've changed historically. But in actual history, October 1778, the Continental Army is now kicked out of New York City, but New York City is like the hub, you know, and George Washington and Ben Talmadge masterminded what would become this successful, enduring espionage network that actually stayed in place until 1785. So it like was there for a while, good 7-8 years, and it was named the Culper Ring, and it was an adaptation of the word Culpeper, which was where George Washington worked as a surveyor when he was young. And Washington had a very limited budget for espionage, but he devoted a quarter of it just to this Culper Spy Ring and its activities. George Washington, his use of deception, covert activities, secret links, informers, that was a model for future spy masters. Washington's idea that he had an idea that with good intelligence, even though there was no way that the colonies should win this war, no way. I mean, Britain was the most powerful country, military force, everything. Like, it was almost like laughable for the colonies to think they could win this war. But Washington believed that with good intelligence, a smaller, less developed force could defeat a bigger force if they had the edge in intelligence. And they could do that. They had the home base advantage, the home field advantage on that. And that was proven a little bit as well. So without this network that he built, the tide of the battle, future shape of the United States, probably the fact that we actually were the United States, would have been much, much different. So I'm going to play our next little video, which is on the Culper Ring development. So how this little clip started was the little team that was doing the investigation were told that, do you know who was the greatest spy master in the history of the United States? And they said, for your answer, go to this place. So that's where the idea that this is opening was.
That do it to pass those messages, it was dangerous. So the ring devised ways to move their secrets in plain sight. Washington's favorite method was to use white or invisible ink, and he'd physically write between the lines of a normal letter, which is where we get the saying, read between the lines. He called it his sympathetic state. It was made using parasulfate and water. It was a chemical process. You write in one chemical, called the agent, then the reader of the letter paints it with another chemical, the reagent. That way you can't just crack it with a match. The solution was supplied by Dr. James J. To this day, the FBI and CIA use invisible ink messages that are based on George Washington's method.
Wow. So did they keep records of how to decode this stuff?
Here's the copy of Culper's actual code book.
Invisible ink wasn't the only code used by the Culper Ring. Only 4 copies of the book were produced. Talmadge had 1 copy for himself. He gave General George Washington another, and the Culper Ring leaders were given the remaining 2. The code was simple. The most popular words at the time were all assigned a number. The word signal was 600. The word Lord was 351. The members of the ring were also given a similar code name. General George Washington's, for example, was number 711.
So this was a very valuable document that people would die for.
Yes.
And die over.
Wow. To think of the American Revolution being this high tech is very strange to me.
It is. This is the way it worked.
To this day, it may be George Washington's greatest magic trick. Culper spies were hidden from the history books for 150 years.
That's, to me, incredible. Like, we only found out about this ring and the participants of the ring in the 1930s. All of that time went by. People went to their death, and then their children went to their death, where it never came out. And we're going to get into how it did come out. But so it's really, this is how, like, seriously and it's amazing that you could do that in a time where there was so much backstabbing and there were so many people flipping and there were so many people deserting, only because they went with the people they knew and grew up with and they had bonds with. They trusted with their life, That was the reason that this worked. Had that just been somebody like that they ran into, it would have been much easier that it leaked. But these were like, womb to tomb, type of mentality with these friends. And so, in June of that year, June of 1778, Clinton's troop had taken over New York City. Washington troops were making their stand in nearby New Jersey and Connecticut. In order to find out what Clinton's intentions were, he ordered Talmadge to create this major intelligence operation against the British, especially around their core base of operations, which was in Manhattan. And he chose Benjamin Talmadge for this. And he formed this ring. Ben put this ring together with all his friends from when he was a kid. And they became Washington's eyes and ears in New York, collecting intelligence on the number of troops in New York and when they were moving. The spies provided them with secrets about the plans, unit strengths, defenses, discoveries that aided them to figure out how to bottle up numbers that were on the go and so forth in New York. As I said, they were badly outnumbered by well-trained British army, and they were one of the most efficient fighting forces in the world. Washington used every means at his possible disposal to counteract this formidable foe, right? So he realized that not only could American secret agents gather this information on how the forces were moving, but they could also give false information through the same way, because everybody thought they were loyalists. Of the entire military budget, Washington allotted 11% total of his entire military budget just to intelligence ops, which is a lot for, I'm in communications, as an industry, and when there's budget cuts or money's tight, they always tend to pull from your marketing, from your advertising, from your communications, like the things they don't see as essential, that's where it's cut. So when you think about, for those of you that were on the Philly Swarm, we saw the destitute state that some of these people were living in, but he instead of going, well, I can't afford to do this money for the intelligence, I'm going to pull that money and put it over here. That's how valuable he kept that 11% working in intelligence, so it really says how much he valued it. And when you look at our books in the Gabaldon verse, I kind of think of Richardson saying this war will be won by who has the better intelligence. Now we know he's a time traveler, so he knows this. But this is basically what it was about. That's what decided who won this war, is who had the better intelligence and in the most timely way. And Washington knew that money was the backbone of any successful intelligence operation. So he devoted of that 11%, an entire quarter of that money went just to the Culper Ring. When he became president, he had the Congress pass a law which was called the Contingent Fund on Foreign Intercourse. So it was a secret fund with $40,000 allocated to the purpose of intelligence gathering. And so his successors in the White House would use that fund to carry out secret operations. And then that developed into what's today, the spy fund, to be able to develop that covert black operation of the government. So I thought that was really neat. Some of the accomplishments of the Culper Spy Ring: they did a counterfeit. These are the major bullet points of the big time accomplishments of things that they did. They did a major counterfeit bust where the British had made a plan that they were going to develop a counterfeit operation to flood the marketplace with counterfeit money, basically weakening and devaluing the continental money so that they would basically go broke. And they had even stolen reams of paper that were used in the printing process of the continental money. And they added, they knew that would add authenticity to it. And the group basically found out about it and was able to get a stop to it. That could have put us under. Second came in 1780. It uncovered the British plans in the summer of 1780 to ambush 6,000 French soldiers that were arriving in Rhode Island to aid the Americans. And if we didn't have those warnings to Washington, the whole French alliance would have probably been damaged or destroyed when that happened. And that was basically what helped us win the war, is having that French alliance. So it's very important. The British had been tipped off that the French were going to land by their own spy, Benedict Arnold, at the time. And after informing the French allies of the pending attack, Washington told the Culper Spy Ring to spread disinformation that he was preparing to raid New York. So the British believed the misinformation and decided we better not go after these Franco-Americans. We better stay here and defend the city. And so it basically allowed the French to land safely through that disinformation campaign. They also tipped off the plot of Andre and Benedict Arnold. And this was, one of the biggest blows to Washington, that his friend of many years, Benedict Arnold, Papa Benny, my husband's ancestor, Benedict Arnold was a brigadier general in the American Army, became a British agent. And it was the Culper Ring that first discovered that he was working for the enemy, that Major John Andre paid a visit to the home of Robert Townsend's father in Oyster Bay, Long Island. Townsend's sister, Sarah, or Sally, who was also a ring operative but is not talked about in turn, saw a stranger leave a note addressed to John Anderson, which was John Andre's code name, alias. And she later heard Andre talking to another British officer about the fortifications of West Point and saying how it would be easy to capture the fort. And so she told her brother about it, her brother being Townsend, Robert Townsend, and he quickly sent a message to Ben Talmadge, who found out that this whole thing was going on. When they searched Andre, that he stashed the orders in his boot. So that'll be covered in the show as well. But before Arnold could be captured, he fled awaiting British warship and returned to the British-occupied New York, where he worked openly with the British after that. But they did manage to capture Andre. Washington did try to plan a covert operation to capture Arnold. He was very pissed off, as you can imagine. But before the plan could be carried out, Arnold was sent to the Chesapeake Bay area. So Andre was hung, as we know. So then also another thing that they did was they obtained a copy of the British naval codes in 1781, which they were able to provide the French Navy. And it gave them a huge advantage against the British fleet during the Battle of Chesapeake that year. And the French sea victory was instrumental to Washington's siege of the British Army at Yorktown, which basically was a hasten to the end of the war. So they did some pretty major things. So now we're going to talk about the players, the individuals themselves. So before I go over the cast that's playing the roles, let's talk about historically who made up the ring and how it worked. So I want to just real quick say hi now that more people are here. Ruth, how you doing? Marcia, Carrie, I'm glad to see some more people here. Ellen says she's eating in that tavern. So cool, great museum about American Revolution on the second floor. Oh, I'll have to check it out. Tavern had speakers come to discuss the revolution, pre-pandemic. I haven't been back since the pandemic. By the way, the food and beer were good. Oh, I have to check it out. Love that the childhood friends were members of the Culper Ring. Okay, so here we have the members of the Culper Ring. So over here, the ring consisted of core agents with a number of other sub-agents, couriers, and support personnel. The ring members had a lot in common. They were all New Yorkers, mostly from Long Island. Each knew each other as friends, neighbors, family. A lot of them had suffered something of cruelty at the hands of the British, or family had suffered cruelty at the hands of the British. All of them pretended loyalty to the crown in some way, shape, or form. And it was really incredible how it all worked. So this first person, that first row up to the left, is Major Benjamin Talmadge. He was a veteran of multiple Continental Army campaigns. He was a native New Yorker. He had a lot to begrudge against the British. He was classmates at Yale with Nathan Hale. His hanging really haunted Ben Talmadge, and that's why, because he was doing that work, and Ben was one of the motivators to get it right and to take care of these people. And his brother also perished on the notorious British prison ship HMS Jersey, which was also nicknamed Hell by the people that were put in prison there. That's how bad the conditions were. It was very infamous. He was very much a man of action, served as senior officer in the 2nd Continental Light Dragoons, followed by command of the 2nd Legionary Corps, an elite unit of mounted and light infantry troops, and he often led raids against the British based on intelligence that he collected at the Ring. And Washington saw his promise in his abilities and his enthusiasm and made him chief of intelligence for the Continental Army. And his instructions were to create from scratch a permanent spy network that would operate behind enemy lines on Long Island, that could penetrate the British lines in New York, and to learn as much about their movements as possible and report all they learned. And Washington said just one thing to Talmadge, to make sure that he didn't know the real identities of the people. Only Talmadge was to know the identities. And so Talmadge did not look far to get men for his secret force. He chose personal childhood friends from Long Island, all very anti-British in their politics, people he knew he could trust with his life. And the first person he chose was his boyhood friend, Abraham Woodhull, who was actually imprisoned at the time, which you actually see on the show. And he basically arranged for his release. He was imprisoned for smuggling. He was caught smuggling, and he arranged for his release and then said, "Hey, you want to spy for me?" After the war, Talmadge also served as postmaster and a member of Congress. From Connecticut, he married Mary Floyd and moved to Litchfield, Connecticut, where he operated a dry goods store. And he was also elected to Congress in 1800 and served 8 terms in Congress. He died in 1835, age 81, and published his memoirs after his death in 1835. And even in his memoirs, he never makes mention of the Culper Ring. So he was always a true professional, never ceased protecting the identities of his spies, even when he was 81 years old, and probably most of them were dead by then anyway. So he went and he got Abraham Woodhull. And that is this guy right here. Second picture. Abraham Woodhull was a Setauket farmer whose family had been there since 1657. He was one of the founding families, their family. He knew the land very well. Woodhull had the job of being in charge of the daily operation of the spy ring. His code name was Samuel Culper. That's why it was called the Culper Ring. But he was motivated by the murder of his older cousin, Brigadier General Nathaniel Woodhull of the New York militia, who was wounded by sword and bayonet cuts after being captured in August of 1776. And what happened was, a lot of the reports said that he was deprived of medical care and food, and he suffered a very agonizing death on September 20th, 1776. So Abraham Woodhull was inflamed over this event by the British, but he didn't immediately take arms up and begin spying. He was a lot more kind of ambivalent at first about it, but was also the only surviving son of aging parents and a brother and a sister still at home. And he was not married, unlike the show. He was not married in real life at that time. He didn't get married until 1781. So he was basically, he didn't want to like leave them in a lurch if something happened to him. So he was a little less willing to kind of step out at first. Once he did start doing the spying, he was always in constant anxiety of being discovered. And by 1779, he recruited another man into the ring, a New York merchant, Robert Townsend, to serve as the ring's primary source in the city. Robert Townsend is this guy right here. Well, this isn't actually him. This is the actor playing him, because there's only one little tiny drawing that's like very sketchy. So I just put when I didn't have a good picture, I used the person from the thing. Anyway, so he basically becomes like the main source of information in the city. And so he goes by Samuel Culper Jr. So then we have Anna Strong, and that is a third picture there. Well, this is actually the actor that's playing her. And she was a neighbor of Woodhull, who operated an essential communications link at Long Island. She was the coordinator. She was what they call in the show the signal. And she was the coordinator of leaving the messages through her laundry line. If she put up a black petticoat, that would mean that Brewster, who was one of the couriers, was there and ready to deliver something. And then how many handkerchiefs she put up would signal which cove he was in. And then it would just look like she's hanging her laundry, you know. But, you know, so it was right in plain sight, but she was delivering out messages. Now, the show really puts this whole spin that they were, you know, her and Abe Woodhull are lovers in a relationship. That really wasn't the case. She was actually 10 years older than Woodhull and the others. My guess, I envision it that she was probably like the one that watched them all when they were little, because they were all around the same age and hung out and played and stuff. And I imagine she was like the older person that, you know, was able to kind of watch the kids and got to know them kind of like little brothers almost. You know, that's kind of how I envision it, but in reality. But in the show, they make the drama, you know. Her husband was Silas Strong. He was a local patriot judge and a former member of the Provincial Congress. And he also got imprisoned on the notorious British ship, the HMS New Jersey, the one that Talmadge's brother was on. And he was one of the very few people imprisoned on that ship that actually survived it. But for most of the war, Anna Strong had to live alone. That brings us to Austin Roe. That's Austin Roe riding his horse to deliver the messages. He was a tavern and innkeeper in Setauket, New York. Now, they really kind of diss him on the Turn show and don't do a lot with Austin Roe. And Austin Roe was extremely critical in the whole operation. So they kind of didn't do him right. He was the principal courier and he was an occasional collector of intelligence. His tavern was situated at the halfway point between the end of Long Island and New York City and became kind of like a haven for travelers, both British and colonial. And so he would listen to the guests talking and gossip and so forth and would memorize the details. And then he would use needing to get supplies as a cover. And he made numerous trips into British held New York as a merchant. He also had like I said, he could legitimately do it because he would use the pretense of having to purchase goods and supplies for his tavern. It ended up being this very long route, 50 miles each way route from Manhattan to Long Island. He had to evade British patrols the whole way. And then he would pass information right to Woodhull at a dead drop at Woodhull's farm. Following the war, Roe continued managing his inn. And in 1790, after the whole war had been won and George Washington was now president, he came to Austin Roe's tavern, meeting him for the first time, like one of his principal agents. So I thought that was pretty cool. Next, we have Caleb Brewster, who is this picture here. And he was a whale boatman and smuggler and privateer. He was originally recruited to be a spy by Major John Clark, and he operated in Long Island and on the Long Island Sound, reporting on British naval activities, and also served as a courier carrying messages from Long Island to Connecticut. He was a soldier in the Revolutionary Army, and he had previously served in battle with Ben Talmadge. Brewster was a lieutenant in the Artillery Corps and fought in Long Island and Connecticut. And his main job for the Culper Ring was to man a whaling boat in Long Island Sound, spying on the British mainly from the Connecticut shoreline, but also carrying intelligence across the Sound to Connecticut, Long Island. So they've kind of fused in this show. They kind of absorbed all the courier stuff that Roe did and just kind of, they mention him, but it's very in passing in one of the seasons. And they kind of put that whole role into Brewster's hands. But it was actually, he was kind of like the by boat and Roe was kind of like the by land, you know. But he was the most important intermediary between Washington and Talmadge. And he was very fearless. He was known for being very fearless in his operations. He didn't use a code name, but he ended up getting kind of nailed because of that a little bit. During a naval engagement on Long Island Sound, he was seriously wounded in 1782, took a musket ball in the chest. He was thought to be dead, but he survived and returned to service a few months later. The next little clip, while I just talked about Roe and Brewster, I want to talk about how communication and transportation worked back then. Because remember, you can't just message people. Shit took a long time at this time. Everything was slow-mo. to get around and slow-mo to communicate and to move. And the thing is with information, if it takes too long to get somewhere, it's useless. And this was an issue that you constantly saw Washington having. We're looking for ways to speed the process up, because so that when he gets the information, it's still of use. It's not outdated. So this was an issue, and this is really a great video.
Headed to the Culper's base of operations on Long Island to see if they can find out more.
Washington had determined after the Battle of New York, he couldn't get stuff through Westchester County because there were too many British around there. So he came way out here. Nobody would ever suspect that they'd be transferring information across the Sound from here. And that's the reason they picked this area. This was a spot where they disseminated the messages.
Not very populated at the time.
5 houses. It was built by Phillips Rowe in 1755. He became a member of the Spy Ring, and his brother, Nathaniel Rowe, and they were the ones picked up and delivered the messages. Austin Rowe used to ride in once a week on his horse to New York City, pick up the information that was gathered in the city, bring it out here. Phillips Rowe and his brother, Nathaniel Rowe.
What was their relation to Austin Rowe?
They were cousins. And these gentlemen were delivered the information to Caleb Brewster, who used to run across the Sound once a week in his whale boat. And they would always come into a different cove and pick up the information, and he would deliver it back to Connecticut. But it's a long road, it's 12 miles, and the Sound was laced with British ships. So you had to be stealthy and careful.
Amazing. So we're talking about riding on horseback from here in Setauket, 55 miles to New York City, and returning here with a message that Caleb Brewster would row physically across the Long Island Sound to Connecticut to deliver to Benjamin Talmadge.
That's right.
Yeah, spying is not nearly as athletic now.
Incidentally, with respect to whale boats, I think it might be of interest to you people to see what one looked like. Just imagine that you're Captain Brewster coming across the Sound in this, with maybe a dozen guys rowing, 6 on each side, and the storms on the Sound could come up very quickly, and there's not much freeboard on this boat. Must have been very dangerous. The British would have seen them very easily. They've been sitting ducks, and I think the guys were pretty brave to do this. Tough, yeah, that's the word, tough.
These guys are amazing. They ride 110 miles round trip to gather the information, and then they rode 24 miles across Long Island Sound to deliver it. Forget the Ironman triathlon. This was true endurance. The thing I'm most impressed by is that they're doing it with the British everywhere, all around them. These guys know if they're caught, they're going to be shot on sight. So one thing they did was try to have codes inside codes inside codes. Some of them were literally hidden right in front of everyone's faces.
Now, this is a typical North Shore cove where Caleb Brewster would have come in, pick up his messages. Now, you see what looks like a clothesline over there? You see anything unusual about this clothesline?
Nope.
It's actually a coded message.
What? Really?
Yeah, it's a coded message.
You mean to tell me that there's crucial information in here that the people of Setauket would know?
Absolutely. Now, this was Anna Strong's clothesline, and Anna hung the petticoats to help Culper Sr. in the early days, and later the Rowe brothers.
What did the handkerchiefs and the petticoats signify?
The petticoat signifies that Caleb Brewster had come in, and the number of handkerchiefs told which of the many coves he came into.
So Caleb Brewster's here and he's in the 4th cove.
That's right, in the 4th cove.
They wouldn't have suspected her at all, would they have?
No, because she was just a woman by herself, but she furthered the cause.
All the while just doing her laundry.
Yeah.
Innocently doing the laundry.
Nobody would suspect her of anything.
One of the little-known stories about the Culper Ring is that there were a great many women who helped its cause. And think about it. Women had the perfect cover story because back then no one expected they'd be involved in something that was so nefarious. Anna Strong and the other female members of the Culper Ring led the way for some of the most successful female spies of all time.
All right, let me go back to where I was here. I tried to be all cool. Um, so so now we get to Robert Townsend, who is this one here. And he was a Yale graduate, former captain in the Queens County Militia, who was later operated as a spy in New York under the code Samuel Culper Jr. And Townsend was a silent partner in a coffee house owned by James Rivington, which we're also going to get to. That's this guy here, who Townsend recruited as a spy for the Ring. Rivington also published a Loyalist newspaper in New York, and Townsend served as a journalist and a reporter for that newspaper. Townsend used that covered social gatherings to gather information from the British forces and the plans, and he was, getting information for the Loyalist newspaper when they were really both in the spy ring. In the show, you have this whole Simcoe thing where he kind of has a thing for Anna Strong in the show, and there's like all of this antagonism because she loves Abe Woodhull, and the way Abe Woodhull loves her, and it's just to basically stem that drama. But in actuality, it was Sally, Robert Townsend's sister, which this is just kind of this is just supposed to represent her, who was very beautiful. She was 17 years old. And what happened was it was her house that when Simcoe came looking for Abe Woodhull and tried to shake up his father and everything, he also stayed at the Townsends, not at the Strongs. And he became kind of interested and obsessed with Sally Townsend, who was Robert Townsend's sister. And so she kind of helped and spied for her brother. She was very attractive, vivacious, and she really, caught the eye of the Lieutenant Simcoe, who succeeded Robert Rogers as commander of the Queen's Rangers. And so he turned around and started just basically establishing his headquarters in the Townsend home. Like I said on the show, this all happens at the Strong home, but it was actually at the Townsends. And Sally used her influence over him to kind of gain some secrets, and then she passed them to her brother. But her brother gave her brother another reason not to like Simcoe, because he didn't like the way he was pushing his sister, so that was all that kind of got merged and reshuffled around in the show, but there's roots and there's nuggets of reality in it. So, and it also makes me think of Claire, because we know Claire tried her hand at these things. I mean, of course, she wasn't as good because she was spotted at it, but she tried to get involved as a little bit of the spying routine as well, and passing things along to the Sons of Liberty and so forth. And then we get to James Rivington, which is this guy here. Now, we're not going to see him in the show until future seasons, because he didn't really come into play until Townsend comes into play, and all that is next season, season 2. I'm just showing you this is the whole ring as they know it. James Rivington was an English-born American journalist who published a Loyalist newspaper in the American colonies called Rivington's Gazette. He also owned a Manhattan coffee house, which was popular among British officers. And Robert Townsend was a silent partner in the Rivington's business, and he contributed to the paper, and he recruited Rivington for the Ring. Now, interestingly, the way in the history that Woodhull came in contact with Townsend, this guy here, was because his cover for going into the city was to see his sister. But then that became implausible, because why would he keep going to his sister's for, it was too many times for it to be plausible. But his sister owned a boarding house, and it turned out that Townsend was one of the people in the boarding house. And on one of the visits, Woodhull started talking to him a little bit and feeling him out and getting a sense of what his situation is. And he was fed up with some of the things that had happened to him and his family. So this all kind of the enemy of my enemy is my friend type of thing. So anyway, the British officers would sit there and shoot the crap in this coffee house, thinking they were entrusted, bragging because they think it's the paper, that's their paper. But basically they were giving away information on the QT. What happened was Rivington was believed by the Sons of Liberty to actually be a loyalist. And because he was a printer and because he like ran this thing for loyalists, the Sons of Liberty did not know this, and they came along and trashed the hell out of his place, trashed the hell out of him, beat him up, all of that. He was run out. So his code number in the ring was 726. His communications were written on the book cover board so that no one would see them, worked in, bound into the covers of the book. You know how they like stick little messages inside the binding? He also conveyed to the American camp through sending these books. And when in New York was evacuated in 1783 at the end of the war, Rivington stayed in the city. And a lot of the New Yorkers were pissed because they thought anybody that was helping George III in the war should never be allowed to live peaceably in New York again. And so he was always seen that he was sympathetic to, that he was a loyalist, but he really wasn't. And he couldn't really say anything. So all he did was he removed the royal arms from his masthead of his business and changed it to the New York Gazette instead of the Royal New York Gazette. But still, people had this bad taste in their mouth for him because he was a loyalist, supposedly, and his business declined. He was beaten up again by the Sons of Liberty, and his paper ceased to exist at the end of 1783, and he passed the remainder of his life in comparative poverty. So really sad what became of Rivington when he really did so much to help, you know. Methods and workings. So they used a lot of tricks. Invisible ink, when they approached, he wanted to create this traditional spy operation. And he originally, Washington had Charles Scott as that person. And you'll see him kind of being over Ben Talmadge in the beginning of the show. But then he quickly went and moved over to just letting Talmadge set it up, and with Woodhull as the lead agent. And so he was actually named Chief of Intelligence in October 1778. So here's where I explained about the sister. Originally, Culper planned to go and visit his sister, Mary Underhill, and her husband, Amos Underhill, at their boarding house. And while in Manhattan, he would collect information from different sources, including British officers staying at the boarding house. And then, you know, because he would look like he would act like he was part of them. And then he would come to Seatucket, and he would pass the information all through the whole operation you just saw. And then Talmadge would get it and give it to Washington. And then Talmadge also layered in another level, which was this code or cipher system, which they talked about in the video. And basically, he would attach 3-digit codes to everything. Talmadge was 721, Woodhull was 722, Townsend was 723, New York was 727, and so forth. There was 3 code books made. One went to Washington, one went to Talmadge, one went to Culper, one went to Abe Woodhull. That's it. So it was basically very, very tight. And it looked like gibberish when you actually would see it on the page. But it went straight to Washington, and Alexander Hamilton also read them, read the missives, but he didn't know who was what. You know, he knew nothing about who they were. And he didn't have access to everything, only what Washington decided to show him. But the initial plan had problems, and Woodhull's visits to his sister, like I said, were too frequent to be legit, to seem legit. So, and when he went to go and visit his sister, he spent the whole time he was visiting his sister wandering around New York, which doesn't look legit. So it didn't look like he had a purpose, which automatically makes him suspicious. And so it made people think, well, why else is he coming to New York, et cetera, et cetera. And so the British became suspicious by spring 1779. And on June 5th, the Queen's Rangers, under the command of John Graves Simcoe, okay, who you'll see he's like the baddie in the show, was sent to the home of Woodhull's family to find Abraham Woodhull. And Abraham was not at home at the time and avoided capture, but they attacked his father. And later, you know, Woodhull gets vouched for by a relative. So the suspicion was lifted, but his father was brutalized. So he was just even more incensed, you know, more motivated to support this spy ring. But he couldn't continue with the same plan. And so when he started to then looked for another person, and that's when we got Robert Townsend in. Robert Townsend lived at his sister's boarding house. Woodhull sounded out Townsend, discovered he was a secret patriot, even though he looked very much like a loyalist as far as anybody knew. And so Woodhull knew, like, wow, he really covered that well, like he sees how he already is set up to do this. He discovered that he was radicalized by the depredations in his hometown of Oyster Bay and on his family property by Simcoe and his men that took it over, like I said, and harassed his sister somewhat. And so they decided he was better suited to get the spy missions done. And plus, his having this background as a store owner and a tavern owner gave him kind of a good reason to inquire about things, because he was writing these things for the Loyalist paper. It was a good cover for him. Austin Rowe, who was the main courier for the Ring, stopped going to New York to gather his intelligence personally. And Jonas, there was another person that dropped out. He would deliver messages via dead drop. That was another thing that they did, burying messages in a box in the field that he rented on Woodhull's property to avoid suspicion. That was when you started seeing the invisible ink being used to write the messages. Rowe would use that a lot on the communications, and he would do it on books and pamphlets. Only Rowe and the recipient of the letter could decipher the messages, because it was on an ink that you had to have the correct ink to decipher it, rather than heat, where anybody could put heat. And that was what was done before that, was through heat. But then anybody that knows that can decipher any messages. But if you had to have a specific agent that only worked with the agent that the ink was written in, then you couldn't just decipher it unless you knew that agent and what to use. So this is kind of how they advanced the whole system. And John Jay, who was a very prominent patriot, he developed this ink. In October 1779, an encounter with British patrol where a letter could have been discovered in a saddle, and he sent a thing to Talmadge saying he'd be visiting New York, and by the assistant of a 355, which 355 was a lady, okay, was what the code was for a lady, of my acquaintance shall be able to outwit them all, is what his message was. So there's been a lot of debate about who this 355 was. Some people feel, as I said, it was Anna Strong. Some people feel that it was Sally Townsend. Some people feel it was a freed slave or servant of John Andres, and some people feel it was a romantic liaison of John Andres. So there's a few different theories about who she was, but she definitely was out there, and it's the one that still is really not quite sure exactly what the right answer is. So she's really still kept her identity somewhat a secret. And in the show, they attribute it to the freed slave that now works for Andre. For payment for Anna Strong taking care of her son, she continues to help the Ring. So that's kind of what they rounded out to, which is one of the theories out there. So throughout this whole war, even after the war was over, the Culper Ring was able to carry out this work all around New York City, right under the noses of the British. They had this very elaborate but yet simple way of doing everything and delivering this to Washington. But the members of the Ring were always under intense British scrutiny. And the thing is, having this happen in the wake of Hale's hanging, they all know exactly what the risk is. Like, they know, as that became a story that they knew happened right before they endeavored to do all this. They knew, like, they get caught, they're done, but they did it anyway. And basically they're rowing through the Sound, all kinds of British ships around them, walking through the towns, all kinds of British soldiers. It had to be like serious paranoia. I would be having a paranoid fit, but a couple were arrested, but never really uncovered. None of them were unmasked as a spy. And the existence of that spy network was virtually unknown to the public until the discovery of correspondence that linked it in 1929. So that's my next video I want to share. So this is going to tell you how they uncovered the spy ring and found out about it.
Today, especially in the intelligence community, you look back at this and see this may be where it really all started.
Possibly, yes.
How cool, right? So far, what do you guys think? I wanted to give you that. That's all basically the real story okay, of the real ring and the real players and how they evolved, because that's not, the show is going to take some liberties with that. And so I wanted to give you the actual story so you kind of know what they're going from. And so as you watch too, you can see where they pulled actual pieces of truth and kind of dramatized it a little bit. So next we're going to talk about the cast. Okay, so here is the cast. The main cast, especially for season 1. The first thing I want to show you is we're going to first talk about the people playing the spies. Okay, so I'm going to show you first this video that from AMC that talks about the spies part of the show. Are you guys enjoying this? I hope so, or I hope I didn't go overboard with information. You know I tend to do that. So your spies are the top row. And if you want to count Andre, because he's technically a spy, but he's a spy from the other side, and Abigail. This is the freed slave that ends up working for Andre in the show, and she is the one that on the show is 355, Agent 355. And of course, we have Washington down here. So I'm going to show you that real quick.
This is all very secret. This is war. Anyone who's listening.
Charlie's about spies in the Revolutionary War. It's about a small group of people that were very tired of their towns being taken over. They were tired of the occupation. They thought, it's time. It's time to be free.
If the intelligence continues to prove true, I can trust his word on targets with higher value. Like Washington.
Washington was obsessed with getting intelligence. He really needs to have some eyes and ears in New York City. And that's when he starts to cast around for some spies.
The British, they used Rogers and his mercenaries like a bear trap. And they knew precisely where to set him. This was an ambush planned in advance.
Ben Talmadge is the catalyst into the series' turn.
Ben really is the one who comes up with the idea for the Culper Ring and is sort of at the forefront of its creation.
As a rising officer, he decides to take a risk and come up with a plan. And that plan is to put together a group from Setauket of his childhood friends, common people, not military, behind enemy lines, and get real information that can help Washington.
He's the type of person that will sort of do anything to fight for his beliefs and the cause that he's committed himself to.
If anyone had to think of this is what an American hero looks like, they would choose Ben Talmadge.
If one red coat in the house is as close as it comes to us, then I shall thank the Lord.
Abe Woodhull was a farmer. Abe Woodhull resented how the British occupied Setauket, but he was not necessarily ready to act.
He is sort of the everyman, reluctant hero who gets dragged in and is forced to take a stand.
Abe, Congress does a lot more than just declare for your freedom. They fight for it. I don't ask anyone to fight for me. I'm asking you.
Ben knows that Abe's father's very loyal to the British crown. And from Ben's perspective, Abe is a perfect person because he has a great cover. And I think I also see something in Abe that maybe he doesn't see in himself right away, which is courage.
I really think that underneath it all, there is a man who will go toe-to-toe with these guys and will risk everything to be free. We'll meet no one in the coves along the bay, and you will signal him which one. I will, yes.
Anna Strong. She was kind of one of the first official female spies that was recorded. And she did it in such a creative way with hanging her petticoats on her line. And I think she really risked a lot and was very brave to participate in that movement.
She was sort of the childhood love of Abe's.
I think it's very clear that their past was very romantic. And they were friends as children. So they grew up, I think, loving each other.
So they're two star-crossed lovers in a way. They should be together. And the circumstance at the time and things beyond their control has just meant that it's not going to work.
I will not waste money on informers.
Agree, sir. All I would need from you is one man to serve as a courier between myself and a friend in New York.
Caleb Brewster is another Setauket boy who grew up to be a whaleboat man. He did not want to stay down on the farm.
I grew up with Ben Talmadge and Abe Woodhull, and they're his two best mates.
Caleb is kind of, the classically fearless.
He was an adrenaline junkie. He was a thrill seeker.
He was almost sort of the action man of the Culper Ring.
Stand still! Wait, no! Wait, you got the wrong...
Take the jail. I've been looking. And now you'll be hanged.
It was extremely dangerous to be a spy. If you were a soldier and you were caught in battle, you became a prisoner of war. If you were a spy and you were caught, you were hanged.
The information you seek is dangerous to obtain. The information that you do obtain is then very dangerous to pass on.
What Turn really tends to do is shining a light into some very shadowy gray areas of the revolution.
This is a modern, edgy, fun show.
It's really exciting because it tells the story of a group of people and these sort of extraordinary feats that they undertook.
I think we're going to see how their efforts and their great risk-taking really affected the outcome of the war and ultimately gave establishment to the United States of America.
So I thought that was great. Okay, so back to the cast here. We have first up Abraham Woodhull, who's played by Jamie Bell, and his code, as we say, is 722. His nickname is Abe. I'm going to give you like the little show description of the character because this will have how they kind of shaped it a little bit differently. So that's what I'm going to tell you now. This again is the show description of these characters as they are. So for Jamie Bell, it says, known also by his spy alias Samuel Culpepper or Samuel Culper, his chosen version of the alias was Culper, is a New York farmer that went on to become a spy for the Continental Army during the American Revolutionary War. Joining together with his childhood friends Caleb Brewster and Ben Talmadge, the three formed what would later become the Culper Ring. The organization received aid and assistance from various others, including Anna Strong. The organization would report to Commander-in-Chief George Washington. So let me give you this next video from Jamie Bell. This was from his appearance on Build, which I always love. They always have good stuff on Build.
Now, the first season really is about the formation of what we understand to be America's first ever spy network. It was spearheaded by Washington. It was a collection of basically childhood friends, regular people. Abraham Woodhull was a farmer. And they all came together and they went on a mission for Washington to help turn the tide of the war against the British. I mean, it really did help him kind of formulate what we now understand to be the United States of America. And they are maybe some of the greatest unsung heroes in American history.
Yeah, and you play one, Abe Woodhull. Tell me how you got involved in the series to begin with.
Yeah, so there's this guy called Rupert Wyatt. He's a director. He directed things like Rise of the Planet of the Apes and stuff, and he was tapped for the pilot. And I know Rupert. He's a British filmmaker, so I've met him a bunch of times back in England, and we'd always trying to find something to work on together. And he sent me this pilot, and he said, "Would you ever consider television?" And I think I just seen that how the tide was turning with television, just the kind of stories that were being told, the attention to detail, the quality on TV was just so great, the kind of talent it was attracting. And I just really saw this as a great opportunity. I thought it was a great character. He's such an underdog kind of character, and I love those characters. And he's someone who stands up for something, and he believes in something. So then I met with the showrunner, and AMC's a great network, and I just kind of went for that.
Yeah, and you're a British actor playing a spy for the American cause, pretending to be
I know,
British.
Janine, that was such a good movie.
Tell me about that. Like, how did you dive into this role?
Well, I mean, like, you know, it's weirdly though, I mean, I think for the time, what we understand as American, as being American, just wasn't the way it was back then. I mean, like, basically, they were all kind of cousins of Englishmen, brothers of Englishmen. I think, like, the way we should kind of consider this war and this conflict is really more of a separation of family, of a younger brother standing up against a bully older brother. So it kind of actually, in a way, weirdly made sense. I am an Englishman who now resides in America, so I think actually it kind of made sense in a way.
And tell me a little bit about the cast that you work with. And, you know, you guys have to wear these costumes, and you kind of have to create accents and things like that on your own, because we really didn't know how people spoke and dress and act. So how did you go about that? I know you kind of use an Irish accent, you say.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way of knowing what these people sounded like. I mean, I would imagine, just geographically speaking, it must be like a mishmash of some kind of European Definitely English. Maybe some Dutch in there. Definitely Scots, Irish, Welsh. A lot of West Country. I don't know if any of you are familiar with a West Country accent, what that would be like. But to me, it sounds particularly agricultural, and I just don't think that is heroic at all. I mean, I guess it's good and necessary for a farmer, maybe, but it just doesn't sound heroic. So I love an Irish accent. If I meet someone who's Irish, I'm like, I like you. Just based on the sound. I don't know him, but he sounds Irish. I like him. So it's a melody. It's got a melodic tone to it. But also the thing with the Irish accent is that the historical troubles between English and Irish specifically, I thought was just another layer. If I played an Irishman, there was that extra little bit of antagonism between the English, but I just thought I had something.
Yeah, and the filming is so beautiful, and especially some of the battle scenes. Tell me about that. Where do you guys film?
Well, yeah. So yeah, well, I mean, Richmond. We shoot the show in Richmond, Virginia. I'm going to now be a bit of a tourist board for the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's not state; it's Commonwealth, which has some of the most amazing colonial buildings. A beautiful countryside. We actually shoot in Thomas Jefferson's childhood home. I actually play soccer right outside of it. If he knew that, he'd be really pissed about that. But it's amazing. I mean, what's the thing I didn't really learn a lot about the Revolutionary War in school because I'm English, and they just don't teach it. They don't. They just don't teach it. So this has been like a real learning experience for me, and I really believe that there's no better way of learning than kind of living it, and as an actor you get so many opportunities to kind of travel back in time and just going there every day and putting on the costume and you immerse yourself. It's very immersive. You are in the 18th century all of a sudden. It's a good way of learning.
And you do play someone who was, he's real. So did you ever go back? Did you read about him, get to know about who he was before doing the show?
Yeah, there's not a lot that is known about him. I mean, I think as a spy, if there's stuff known about you, it probably means you weren't a very good spy. Like we know who Nathan Hale is, for example, and he's dead. But he was caught. Obviously doing something incredibly noble, but nothing is known of any of these people. Today I came from Washington D.C. To come down here, and I was amazed. It was like there's just nothing that is in dedication to these people for what they did. There's nothing that they're remembered by. They went to their graves with the secret of what they did, and I guess that's a testament to their skill as a spy network.
So isn't that really that really moved me hearing that? I mean, even though you knew it, it's kind of like sad because these people really put their lives on the line, and there's so many monuments and there's so many tributes. Like we just went to Philly, and there's like monuments everywhere and plaques everywhere and tributes everywhere, and it's like they're like the unsung heroes that really just we just lucked on the information about them. So it's actually really, it just makes you have a lot more respect even for them. Any questions so far or any comments on what I'm saying? Yes, the book is Washington Spies by Alexander Rose. That's the book the show's based on. Yeah. Loved Billy Elliot. I spoke to Gary Lewis at a convention about the film. Hey, Carrie, how you feeling, hon? I hope you're feeling better and that your household's improving. He said Billy Elliot was a tremendously low-budget independent film that luckily took off. He was great in that, Jamie Bell, I thought. And he talks about it in this thing. I just didn't include it because I edited all these videos so I could kind of pop them in here and then put the important parts for you guys. But if you go find that video, I'll have him talking about it. Now he totally knew nothing about acting when he went on it. So it was funny. Okay. So now we get to Seth Numrich or Numrich. I'm not sure if you say Numrich or Numrich, but he is playing Benjamin Talmadge. Culper code number 721, alias John Bolton was his alias name. He was the organizer and handler on the show. And the description from the show of his character. A childhood friend of Abe's, Ben is a Continental Dragoon in Washington's army, a fearless soldier and man of action. Ben is a natural born leader and the rock that keeps Abe and his friends together. Freshly appointed to a new intelligence detail, he is the direct line from Washington to the nascent spy ring he oversees. He is a Yale-educated cavalryman who is a passionate believer in the patriot cause. But even Ben's unshakable resolve will be tested in the spy game. In 1773, Ben graduated from Yale. During his time there, he became friends with schoolmate Nathan Hale. Hale would go on to become a captain in the Continental Army and was later hanged on September 22nd, 1776. Ben enlisted in the Continental Army, and by the autumn of 1776, he had achieved the rank of Captain of Dragoons and goes on to form the Culper Ring. So that's the description for him. Next up, we have Caleb Brewster, and that is being played by Daniel Henshaw. And he really kind of reminds me of Angus a little bit on Outlander. He has like that rambunctiousness to his personality. Even my husband, like he said, he saw previews and you know, he was a huge Angus fan. I had Stephen Walters do a little message to him at an event I went to because I knew Tom would just go bananas over it. Anyway, when he saw the previews for Turn, he pointed Caleb out. He's like, "That's going to be my man, isn't it?" I said, "Yeah." So anyway, this is Daniel Henshaw. He's plays the courier. His Culper code number is 725. He doesn't have an alias. And he's a whaleboat captain enlisted as a lieutenant in autumn 1776. The official description says, in modern times, Caleb would be the member of SEAL Team 6, the best of the best. Constantly at risk as a courier, he is a man who relishes action and close scrapes. Bored with his childhood farm life in Setauket, Caleb jumped at the chance to see the world. At 19, he signed on to a whaleboat crew headed for Greenland, where he braved icy waters and treacherous conditions in the hunt for sperm whales. Always a thrill seeker, he faced down Mother Nature in all her glory and fury. As a result, the British do not intimidate him because little does. I know, Ben Talmadge's spy name should have been Cutie Pie. Yes. So now we get to this lady here. Heather Lind is playing Anna Strong, who is the spy and signal for the Ring. She is the wife of Celia Strong and childhood friends. Now in the show, former love of Abe Woodhull. Okay, but that wasn't true in real life. The description for her character says Anna is smart, headstrong woman who has been friends with Abe, Ben, and Caleb since they were children. 3 years ago, Anna was engaged to marry Abe until the engagement was broken off by their respective fathers. Her father was a liberal Whig, and Abe's a staunch Tory. As the British marched into town and drove her family out, Anna married Celia Strong, a known Whig, in the wake of her broken engagement. Since then, whispers have implicated Anna as a Patriot sympathizer. Despite being married to others, the connection between Abe and Anna remains strong, and perilous circumstances of the war draw them closer together. Then we get to this guy down here, the big cheese, George Washington. And that is played by Ian Kahn, and he is really fantastic. If you're a friend of mine on my friend page, I posted a talk that he did for a fundraiser for the coming 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which will happen in 2026. And he just did a really stirring speech. When he got this role, he really immersed in everything George Washington, and went to Mount Vernon, and really absorbed it. And he got so. And every time I've seen him speak, or you see interviews with him, he's just so. He just kind of lives it and breathes it. He's very into it. I think it really changed his life playing this role. So this is the show. He didn't have a show description for season 1. So this is the show description for his character for season 2, which is pretty similar. So it says, this is not the George Washington we are used to seeing on the dollar bill. A 44-year-old general in charge of the Continental Army, he is a detail-oriented perfectionist who is well aware of his shortcomings. Washington is hard on himself as a leader, carefully presenting an image of strength and confidence to a ragtag army lacking those qualities themselves. A man of strong emotions, Washington has learned to restrain himself through sheer strength of will and tries to instill the same discipline in his army and his country. Knowing the fate of the revolution hinges on an alliance with the French, Washington focuses on the bigger picture and keeps his own counsel, which often creates conflict with his spy master, Ben Talmadge. So what I'm going to play for you next is a little piece of an interview that features Ian Kahn, who plays Washington, and Heather Lind, who plays Anna Strong.
But to actually see the formation of America's first spy group is pretty cool. So talk to me about being part of this awesome concept.
It's just been a joy to work on this show from the very beginning. I mean, when I first read the script, I thought not only was it beautifully written and beautifully conceived, but it felt like a story that I had never heard before. I didn't know anything about the spy ring. I knew really basic details about the Revolutionary War. So I felt like this is a story I want people to hear. And just working on it has been a great joy. And I get to work with fantastic actors and humans. So it's been really amazing.
That's important. Fantastic actors, but horrible humans would probably not be a good sentence. Yeah. You and I were just joking because I interviewed Jesus from Killing Jesus. And I'm like, it doesn't get any better than playing Jesus. But George Washington's probably up there. So talk to me about becoming George Washington. You were researching Martin Sheen, you were telling me, up from the West Wing?
Well, yeah, I was, there's a thing that is said often that when you're playing a sort of present king or president, that it's actually not you don't bring that to the table. It's really everyone's reaction to you that sort of makes you who you are. And so I watched Sheen. I was like, he does such a magnificent job he did such a magnificent job on that show. But I was fortunate enough to be able to do a lot of research about General Washington himself and learn so much about himself, about his life and his history, that it really was a very enriching experience to play him, and it was a great honor.
Anna Strong, also a fun character. Talk to me about playing her and bringing her to life.
Anna Strong was a real person who was involved in the spy ring and, famously known for hanging petticoats to signal to her courier. So in terms of spies at that time, women weren't known to be very political. And so actually they made really good spies because people didn't expect them to care or be interested in politics. And they actually, Anna, in our show, plays a tavern owner, and she had the ability, by being the owner, to sort of eavesdrop on a lot of conversations. And women were also used as spies because they always needed a chaperone. So they would walk with somebody and kind of, in effect, chaperone a spy to another location. So it's fascinating to hear the history of what women were able to do and how much they risked.
You mentioned the word spy ring because what's fascinating is that this is essentially the beginning of spying in America. Obviously, you see movies like Citizen4 now, and we see what it's become. But this is grassroots, as basic as it gets, and we see the formation of the revolution. Talk to me about the beginning of the spy ring, because seeing the formation and obviously the introduction of Benedict Arnold, who we know now is Benedict Arnold, but who wasn't quite Benedict Arnold then, seeing that all brought to life, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's interesting because Washington was a spy master. And there's been some things that are sort of the opposite of what we think. He didn't have wooden teeth, he had ivory teeth. And he didn't cut down the cherry tree, and he told lies all the time. He was really, really tough. He told them so well that people didn't even know that he had a spy ring until Alexander Rose did this research and found out who's one of the producers and writers of our show. And that's really what the show is about, really, is about the ring. It's not as much about Washington as it is about this team that Washington puts together, and they all, it's Washington spies, and it's about how they infiltrate the English side of the army, and how Washington ends up winning the war because of these four characters, which are Anna and Abe and Ben Talmadge and Caleb Brewster.
You find as actors, when you're looking, obviously, if you've taken a 5th grade social studies class, you know what happens, but do you find yourself fascinated by the story, even though we know the end result, as you're digging into the scripts and seeing kind of the beginnings that you may have not known about?
Yeah, I think what I found most fascinating is even though we know the ending, we know so little about the process of learning how to spy. And I think we look at history as a kind of beginning, middle, end point, and we kind of see it as a straight line. And I think what's fascinating about this history is they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know if they were going to win, and they didn't even know if winning was better than losing. I mean, they didn't know what independence would feel like. So I think for them, they were scrappy. They were young people. They were kind of rebels, and to see history in that light, as you know, it's less clean. It's less easy to see good and bad and heroes and villains. It's much more sort of, it helps us relate to what's going on today, to understand that it's not so simple.
I mean, Washington, hopefully he's a different Washington. He should be a different Washington than the one that we've all grown up thinking he was, because the Washington we all think about is sort of the man in the dollar bill who sort of looks angry and constipated all the time. And we're actually watching him as a general, watching him be a war hero.
So I love that. Angry and constipated all the time. So next on our list here, that's also on the Patriots side, is this lady right here, Abigail. Abigail is played by Idara Victor, is her name. And this is the description the show gives for Abigail. It says, as a slave, Abigail was sold at 13 by her father master to work in the household of Anna Strong's father. The two women grew up together, and Abigail became not just Anna's housemaid, but her confidant. After being sent by Major Hewlett to work as a servant for John Andre, Abigail became a trusted member of his household, valued for her loyalty, discretion, and even the sound advice that she gives Peggy Shippen. That's for season 2. Unbeknownst to Andre, she is actually working as a spy, sending intelligence back to Anna in little hidden gifts for her son, Cicero, in exchange for Anna's continued care of her son. Although Abigail is sympathetic to the Patriot cause, her ultimate loyalty is to Cicero, her son, and she will do whatever she thinks is best for her son's future. So that is what Abigail is all about. Next up, we have Mary Woodhull. That's this person right here. She's played by Megan Warner, and that she is the wife of Abe. Now, again, this is a show change because Abe was not married in real life during the time that this spy ring was at its most active. But of course, it adds more drama to have him be married and her not happy with things, and this whole thing with the Thomas brother. We're going to get into the facts and fiction side of it in a minute. But in this show, he does marry Mary Woodhull. She has no connection to his brother, and all that story is fabricated. But he does marry her in 1781. So it is true that he ends up being married to this lady, but he wasn't during this time in real life. So here is the show description for Mary. Young in features, but middle-aged in temperament, Mary comes from a Tory family based out of Suffolk County. Originally, she was betrothed to marry Abe's brother Thomas, but he died soon after their first and only meeting. So she really hadn't known him. She was just basically, it was an arranged thing. A new arrangement was proposed by Richard Woodhull, and after some careful coaxing, Abe married her in his brother's stead. Her life revolves around Abe and their son Thomas. She counts on Abe to provide for and protect them. So now we're going to get into the loyalist side of the cast. That's all of the Patriot side of the cast. Now we're going to get into the loyalist side of the cast. And I'm going to bring up this last video. And this is from the show, like that other video I did for the Patriots, but this is the one for the loyalists. This is going so much better than I actually thought it was going to go. I shouldn't say that because that'll be like my little walker breaking down as soon as I think it's so great.
We, in turn, are choosing a time in the Revolutionary War. The British have just landed on Long Island and then into New York. There were those who appreciated that the British brought civilization to the country. So those loyalists believed, and they believed it fervently, that this was the way of the world. And that's sort of the mood in which we start. I wish to offer my services for whatever they may be worth.
Richard Woodhull was a judge magistrate of Setauket and surrounding towns.
It's his job to be the buffer, as it were, between the occupying British soldiers and the villagers.
Richard is a staunch loyalist, and Richard believes in law and order and doesn't see how a nation without a king can effectively govern itself.
Although most of the village is loyal to the king and the crown, there is a growing dissent, particularly amongst the youngsters, and they're beginning to be turned to the patriot politics, and they get together and start to help in this spying effort. Unfortunately, one of them is my son.
You have responsibilities to more than this farm, more than yourself.
But Father,
legacy is everything.
Richard, as a character, ultimately wanted Abe to be just like him. And now they have this big separation with their political ideology. Abe is someone who believes he should be in a free country, and Richard is someone who believes that it's okay to be royal subjects.
So the conflict between father and son and the tension between will Richard discover what his son is up to is at the core of the show.
I've never killed anyone. I have plenty just like you.
Simcoe is a British officer.
He is somebody who has been all around the world enforcing the occupations of the crown.
There's something a little wrong with this guy.
The best way to describe Simcoe, I would say, is that he is self-appointed security guard. He has his own set of rules, and he makes sure that who he requires to toe the line is toeing the line.
He is, I would say, a villain in our show because of that kind of mentality and brutality.
He is under the command of Major Hewlett.
We are the beacon of authority, and we bear the burden of that authority.
Major Hewlett is the commander of the garrison that has taken over Setauket.
He has embraced his position, and he has embraced the idea that he is going to reach the people through the hearts and minds of the people.
He believes that the colonists want him to be there to put down the rebellion. He believes that he is really working to create peace and make things the way they were, and that that's actually what people want.
You stop at 130 cogs a head.
For men, that's for boys under 12.
The Queen's Rangers, or Rogers Rangers as they were also known, were essentially a mercenary unit headed by Robert Rogers. He was sort of the Davy Crockett of his age and a very rough and wild character.
He was called the White Devil by the Indians in the Northern Territories because he adopted their methods of warfare, hunting, tracking, scalping.
When he heard that a new war was starting up back in the colonies, he went back there and tried to pitch his services both to the British and to Washington. And the British essentially paid more.
Some intelligence for you, John. England controls the harbor. Bunch of blokes in red out there. Big navy behind them.
John Andre is the head of British intelligence.
He was very good at spycraft. He was very good at the notion of turning others towards the crown.
Andre, from Robert Rogers' point of view, is a snake.
What you'll see in turn is that Andre is a very formidable foe.
Anarchy. Chaos. Masquerading as freedom. An excuse for criminal activity and every man for himself. Well said.
This is going to be a show that hopefully really intrigues in the sense of learning about how the country really was formed.
And you're going to actually really get an insight into the psychology that made up these people on both sides of the war and how complex it was.
I don't know what you're hiding, but I do know that you will tell me because you will have no choice.
Okay, so we have here for our loyalist Richard Woodhull up first, and that is Abe's father. He's played by Kevin McNally, and it's very show altered for drama because in real life he was a patriot. He wasn't a loyalist. But they've changed it to add that extra drama between father and son to show all of how the nation was divided and families were divided and friends were divided. So they're doing all of this, showing drama and conflict between people. So they flipped that in this show. So the show description for Richard Woodhull says the local magistrate of Setauket, he was actually a minister in real life, I believe. is Richard, Abe's father, and protector of the moral center of their town. A longtime widower who has lost his oldest son in the war, he is devoted to the only son he has left. Richard appears to be a diehard Tory loyalist, but in truth, he believes it's impossible for the rebellion to succeed against the might of the British Army. And like any good judge, he weighed the facts and wants to be on the right side when the war is over. Next, we have Edmund Hewlett here, that he's played by Bern Gorman. His real life name was Richard Hewlett, the person that was in charge of Setauket in the Battle of Setauket, and was the royal governor, was the person that was in charge of the Loyalists. But they changed his name to Edmund in the show because honestly, they really changed his character a lot. They did a lot of tweaking. They even made him from Scotland instead of England, and just a lot of different changes, and they kind of made him very, very different. So I think that's one of the reasons they changed his name, just to say, yeah, we're not making it him, you know. So anyway, for his description, it just says Major Hewlett is a British officer who was in command of the garrison at Setauket until 1778. He is a man of learning, and he is known behind his back as the Oyster Major. Next, we have Robert Rogers right here, and he is played by Angus McFadden. And his character description says, the mercenary leader of the Queen's Rangers, Rogers fought alongside Washington in the French and Indian War when they were both soldiers in the King's militia. After the war, Rogers returned to England, where he drank and gambled his way into debtor's prison, losing his wife and respectability in the process. The seductive lure of British pounds and a thirst for battle brought him back to America on the eve of the Revolutionary War, where he was determined to wipe out Washington's rebellion and make back his fortune. A wild card operating outside of the system, Rogers is revered as he is feared. His only loyalty is to coin. Next, we have John Graves Simcoe, played by Samuel Roken. And he is also highly fictionalized. He was a loyalist soldier, eventual leader of the Queen's Rangers. So he did do some terrible things, and he did come after Abe, and he did beat up on his father. All of that stuff does happen, but it's a much more sadistic person in the, you know, he was basically in his mind doing his job, just like Tarleton thinks he was doing his job, you know. I mean, it was pretty brutal, but he was not like this evil, sadistic creature, supposedly. But they've kind of made him more the villain of the show. They fused what he actually was in real life with Robert Townsend's sister, Sally. They kind of switched all of that and all of his role with Townsend over to the Strong, so that he was staying right there in the Setauket where everything happened. So they kind of shifted that around a little bit. So a little bit of this is kind of a little bit of fabrication. This is the description from the show. John Graves Simcoe is a recently promoted soldier in His Majesty's Army and serves under Major Hewlett's command in Setauket. A born attack dog, he harbors an intense dislike for most colonists, especially Abe, and holds a deep, menacing infatuation with Anna. A skilled fighter and true believer in the British cause, Simcoe is as crafty as he is dangerous. Next up, we have John Andre, right here. He's the leader of the intelligence ring for the British, very multi-talented, very oozing with charisma. Major John Andre was born May 2nd, 1750, dies October 2nd, 1780, only 30 years old. Very talented, almost a waste or a shame in a way that such a talented, charming person was killed in such a shameful way. Even Ben Talmadge, when you look at the articles, because I had to do a lot of research to put this one today, Ben felt really kind of bad that he had to get hung, because when he actually got to know him and talk to him as he was waiting to go and face the gallows, he actually got a lot of respect. He says, I wish we didn't have to do that. He kind of hated that they had to hang him. So he's hanged for assisting Benedict Arnold's attempted surrender of the fort of West Point. So his description in the show, Andre is the head of British intelligence and bases his operations out of New York. far more versed in counter-espionage tactics than his counterpart, Ben Talmadge, which isn't really true as far as the real life goes. He is experienced and cunning in his ability to take down targets. Known for his keen eye for human weakness, Andre employs a variety of methods to turn sources and isn't above using sex, money, and the promise of power to get his man. So in season 2, we'll meet Benedict Arnold, Peggy Shippen, and Robert Townsend. They weren't in that screen because we're not there yet. When we go to do the intro for season 2, we'll talk about them. A couple key players are left out of the story turn on TV, of the actual story, and that is mainly the main courier, Austin Rowe, and his cousins that assisted him, and Sally Townsend, who was also a very prominent person and the object of Simcoe's actual affection and unwanted attention rather than Anna Strong. So because they moved that to Anna, she kind of got cut out of the picture. Questions so far before I get to this next little part? We're done with the screen sharing, so I don't have to focus on what I'm doing here as much. Is there anything you guys wanted to ask or talk about? Yeah, Simcoe is really evil. He's very Blackjack Randall-y almost, We'll have to talk about that. Who do you hate more, Blackjack Randall or Simcoe, once we get to something really horrible he does on this show? So fact and fiction. Okay, so I just want to talk to you a little bit about the differences between historical fiction versus fictionalized drama based on a true story versus docudrama. Okay, so they all kind of have a similar vibe, but they're very different, and that affects how truthful they are to the history. Historical fiction is a fictional main story and characters set in a historical period with events and characters that are historical around the fictional main characters. This would be where Outlander falls. The main characters, the Frasers, the Mackenzies, are fictionalized lives in the midst of real history around them, okay? A fictionalized historical drama based on a true story. This is where I would put Turn or The White Queen or things like that. This would be a true story based on a true story where your main characters are the historical characters, as opposed to the main characters being fictional characters in a historical setting. Okay, that's the main difference. But much of the unknown and some of the known uses a lot of dramatic license to make the story more vibrant and dramatic for storytelling purposes. Docudramas are usually much truer to the history, and they're basically using an actor to simply tell or demonstrate the narrative of the historical story. They often are interspersed with real footage, mixed with an actor reenacting certain things, and that type of thing, and maybe showing real documents. It's much more, but it's less dramatic. It's less of a story than it is a telling of the history. It's more of an educational vibe than an entertainment thing. So if you were looking at historical fiction, fictionalized historical drama based on a true story, which do you imagine is more accurate, usually in historical accuracy? Historical fiction or fictionalized historical drama based on a true story? It actually is the historical fiction usually, especially if you're comparing Outlander and Turn. Why is that? Because in historical fiction, the narrative drama, the individual stories, the things that intrigue, that kind of set the pace of the storytelling, are fictional. Okay, and the historical aspects are the invariables. And those details give the fictional story more realism and more authenticity. The more accurate the history around the fictional characters feels, the more realism and authenticity it gives your story. The more accurate they are, the more immersive your fictional story feels. The personal narrative drama comes from the fictional side. So where you can have their characters like Jamie or Claire or Roger or Bree do anything you want to have them do, as dramatic as you want them to be. So you don't need to change the history to make your drama happen. You know what I mean? However, the historical truth and sprinkling of the characters immerses the viewer and reader and gives the fictional story credibility and weight. When you have the historical drama based on a true story idea, the fictionalized historical drama, which is like Turn, the main characters are part of the history. Okay. You don't have like two parts that you're blending. You're creating an interesting narrative with all real people and all real characters. Therefore, to make that work in episodic, entertaining television, the events surrounding those people, as well as the key details of why things happened and so forth, are historically important to remain accurate, but the detail and the drama in the individual stories have to be negotiated a little to make the story interesting and flow in in a TV show. They become the Janie and Claire and the Roger and Bree and everything, but they're actually real people. And so something has to give. You don't have those two sides like you have in the other. So while mostly every one of the main casts are representing real people, like Outlander, some characters you'll find are fused into one that were two people in history. Some players are just dropped and their role is skipped. Timing is altered so that it flows better narratively. Fictional relationships and dramatic conflict are added to make the story juicier, such as Anna Strong and Abe Woodhull's romantic history, or Abe and his father being on opposite sides. These things help you invest and care about the story, you know what I mean? Because they're like intriguing drama. And so it intrigues us enough to follow the emotional investments and care about the people, right? However, the story underneath still, for the most part, the main tent poles of the story of that and the effect of the Culper Spy Ring in the revolution remains somewhat mostly true. And then you get very inspired by the story. So that's kind of the idea of it. That can feel a little frustrating for history buffs and for people like us that are using the ideas that are learned in this story to infuse Diana's world of Outlander with more historical color. Because then you're trying to figure out what to trust, what's real, what's not real, or is what I'm saying the truth, or is it something they created and made up? And you're trying to decipher that. So you know what you can figure was happening for real with your show. So it gets sometimes frustrating for people. So if you're looking at the show that way, you're going to have to pick through it a bit. I do see obvious tweaks of the truth. And as we go, I'll try to let you know, and you can do the same to me, because I know we have a lot of people that are very smart in our group that know a lot of these historical things that I might not be aware of. But you can't go into this show. You're not going to enjoy the show if you go into it with this mentality, I'm going to have a hissy fit every time they do something inaccurate, because there's going to be inaccurate things in this show to make the narrative work. This is not Outlander. Outlander is this fictional story in the historical world. And so they can make the historical facts more accurate. That's kind of the point. You need to have that work. It's not that case here. And so it's not as easy to do that when everybody is real and you're trying to pull it all together into a narrative flow. Something has to give. So you're going to have to change some things. The other thing to consider is the subject matter here as far as accuracy. This is a story about a spy ring that was so secret that no one knew about it or the players until long after they all died and their children died. This was unknown till the 1930s. So these people were intentionally boring. They were intentionally trying to stay out of notice. They were very private. They told no one. They didn't make attention. They didn't do anything to try to draw attention to themselves. So they were trying to be like nobodies and stay out of notice and all of that stuff. So to try to dramatize that as a challenge, also the truth is sketchy. So, we only have a very limited amount of verifiable facts. So a lot of the details that are sketchy, but in the ambiguity of the sketchiness is where the storyteller lives, because since there's so little that's known, it gives leeway for writers to work dramatic magic, in the indefinite and then mysterious parts of the history. And Diana, we know, those of you that follow our stories, does this all the time. Like, she lives for those little unknown nuggets or ambiguous history and so forth, and to like kind of exploit them and fit her characters into because it's unknown. It's unknown why Bird went into the hills instead of going on the Trail of Tears. So, Diana can turn around and have it be that Jamie gave him the heads up. You know what I mean? Because we don't know why he did it. So she kind of uses all of those ambiguous spaces to kind of create some of her fiction. And so you see that the show is doing that as well to some extent. Okay, so you can feel good about the show reflecting the story of the Spy Ring, but don't get hung up on the personal specifics, on the cast of characters and all of that stuff. I will note as we go some things that are obviously different. I've been doing that here as we've been talking, but I'm going to give you a few up front that we know going in are different. Okay, and that this is the actual fact compared to what the show does. So I'm going to give you a list of those now. Artistic license. Exactly, Jane. So there's a few to know up front. Number one, the show begins in 1776 and immediately after the loss of the Battle of Long Island. And while that loss did start Washington on the plan to set up an intelligence network and to start working into the intelligence side of things, the Culper Ring itself did not begin forming until 1777 and didn't actually start sending messages and stuff until 1778. But they needed to sync up the timing for the show, so they prompted that up a little bit, Number two, Abe's brother didn't die quelling a riot that Abe started, giving Abe the guilt of his death. And then he didn't marry until 1981, and the person he married was his own choice of marriage, not his brother's fiance. So that's fictionalized. In reality, Abe Woodhull was actually motivated by the murder of his cousin, General Nathaniel Woodhull of New York militia, who was wounded by sword and bayonet cuts after he'd been captured on August 29, 1776. They said he was deprived of medical care and food and suffered a very slow, agonizing death that ended on September 20th. And Abraham Woodhull was incensed by it. But he didn't immediately take up arms or begin spying, and slowly came along. And then as he got involved, more and more got him upset and fired up to do more. So, and you'll kind of see that as well on the show. Another fiction fact thing is Woodhull began spying in 1778, and he sent his first Culper letter on October 29th, 1778, after he had sworn an oath of loyalty to the crown as a cover, which you do see that in the show, but it's earlier. No smoldering love story between Anna and Abe. Anna was actually 10 years older than Abe. She did, however, ride with him to New York as his wife to give him cover. Another note, Abe's father, not a Tory judge, but a minister and a Patriot sympathizer. He was badly beaten by soldiers headed by Simcoe, trying to find and arrest his son, and he was not killed in a skirmish, as you see on the show. Next one is Abraham Woodhull was unmarried and childless during the period in which he was a spy. He did not marry Mary Smith until 1781, did not have a son named Thomas. Next, Anna Strong was 10 years older than Abraham Woodhull. There's no evidence to suggest that they ever had anything other than a professional relationship and friendship. Edmund Hewlett is a fictitious character. The commander of the garrison of Setauket was Richard Hewlett, although he did not then in turn succeed John Andre as spy master. In the show, he does. Richard Hewlett was married with 11 children, and he never had an affair with Anna Strong, which he does on the show. Robert Rogers did not engage Benjamin Talmadge in any kind of battle. That's fictitious. Abraham Woodhull did not join the regiment of loyalist American volunteers founded by Benedict Arnold, which he does in the show, to keep his cover going. Nathaniel Sackett doesn't die in the war. He survives the war. In the show, he dies. Sarah Livingstone was the wife of John Jay, not a homesteader who helps Ben Talmadge. They kind of used her name, but they gave her a different role with Ben. And lastly, Amos Parker was the bodyguard for General Lafayette. He wasn't a British privateer. So those are like the upfront things you can know. So here is the plan of how we're going to cover this show on Queen Bee's Outlandish Hive. The show consists of 4 seasons, 10 eps per season. Each week, I will post a feedback thread, thank you, honey, for that week's episode. And each week, you will post your feedback on that episode. We'll take approximately a year to go through all 4 seasons, and hopefully Outlander will be back when we're done. And what my plan is when we get to 5, the midpoint of each season, we'll skip a week and we'll do a live, like the mid-season wrap chat. And then we'll do at the finale, we'll skip a week of watching the episodes, but in that week, we'll do another finale wrap chat intro to the next season. So it'll basically be 5 episode watches, then a week where we do a live with no episode watch, then the next 5, then a live where we do the finale and intro the next season, no episode watch, then 5, mid-season finale, mid-season wrap, no episode watch for that 6th week, and then next 5, like that. So it'll be basically 8 extra weeks added into the 40 weeks. So it'll be about 48 weeks. And then I'm figuring we'll probably skip around the holiday or something like that. So figure about a year to go through all 4 seasons in this plan. When you do your feedback on the feedback thread, you're going to give a spyglass rating, okay, which is the little spyglass emoji, and it's usually 1 to 5 spyglasses. Usually you can do like 4 point whatever, you know, with how we normally do. You can give your impressions of the episode, your good, bad, great for the episode. You're going to give your best patriot performance and why, and the best loyalist performance and why for the episode. And then you're going to put down any outlandish connections. Did something in the episode make you reflect differently or reflect and think about something in Diana's work? And if so, in what way? Okay. After that, what we'll do is I will do a podcast type episode for each episode, which will appear on Patreon first. And then 2 or 3 days later, we'll post here. I'll open it up public and post it here. At the midpoint and end of each season, so every 5 episodes, I'll do a wrap chat style live right here, which I already said. So the ones after a finale will include a little section at the end that introduces the next season, and then we'll be off and running into the next season. So that's the plan of how we're going to cover turns. So this coming week, you're to watch season 1, episode 1. I will put up a feedback thread for you guys, and then when I record the podcast, I'll include some of the feedback from the thread. So this is really exciting. Regular people change the world, and this show is a good reminder of that, that you are never too small or insignificant to make a difference in the world. So with that note, I'm going to close what I have to say. Let me see if you guys have anything on the board, any questions, any thoughts that you want to share. I would like to have the list of truth, not truth for the upcoming episodes. Okay, I will post the list, Jane, on the Queen Bee's Hive thread of what I kind of pulled together as far as what's truth and what's not truth that I know of. Now, there's going to be other things because, like I said, they do take a lot of artistic license with the individual stories and stuff, but the main points are there. The Battle of Setauket actually happened, the way Abe was recruited because he was captured and then Ben Talmadge kind of arranges to get him out and then tries to pitch him to be a spy. Like a lot of the main beats, like the tent poles, as they say in Outlander, are there, but a lot of the fluff around it, the spicy sex stories and all that kind of stuff, that stuff is dramatized, to make it more juicy. So hopefully you guys got some stuff out of this, and I didn't bore you with all of my details. I just kind of wanted to immerse you in what this is all about and why it's important. And I hope that you're excited. So I'll put the feedback thread up for season 1, episode 1. And we'll just each week do an episode. So that's all I have. Any questions? Okay, I'm glad you liked it. Janine says, wow, this was great. I really enjoyed your format, Angela. Thanks for explaining the actors and characters. It helped. Okay, good. I'm glad. I hope that you guys really enjoy this little pollinating adventure of ours. And so I will explain again what we're looking for on the feedback when I post it. Okay? And thank you for hanging out with me. I'm sorry I had all the prompts trying to get on, but hopefully it was worth the wait. Much love to you all.